everybody, to the Friday edition of the Daily Cheat Sheet. We are missing our usual Mend the Dude Stern, but filling in for him is Lee the Man Trink. He's a jack of all trades and a master of all of them. He's a friend of ours, and he also has his own podcast called The Wrong Side of History. I encourage everybody to download that. That's called The Wrong Side of History, and he's not here to plug that today. He's here because we're all friends. We all met through chat groups, through WhatsApp chat groups. Just so people know, most of us are from Los Angeles. Some of us are in the industry, not in the industry. But after October 7th happened, a lot of us went underground because we were scared to death to say our points out loud. Just like Trump supporters were scared to say they're Trump supporters, we were terrified as Jews to come out and say out loud our points of view. So we had these inside chat groups. So that's how we all met.
I'm just going to correct one thing real quick, Judah. Some of us weren't afraid to say the stuff. Some of us went underground into the chat groups in order to gain allies and come out stronger to say it even louder. So I'm just throwing that out.
No, well said. I wasn't scared, obviously, to go into the chat groups, and neither was Lee.
I kind of woke up, but number one, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it. But yeah, like for me, that it was a wake up call that opened my mouth, and so that's how I got into the fight.
Yeah, and you're a great fighter, and I just want to start with this. I am a Republican. I've been a Republican pretty much my whole life. I don't consider myself a Republican anymore. I want to call myself a conservative. But I was probably 18 during the Iraq War. And obviously I felt lied to. I felt betrayed to. I felt betrayed by George W. Bush. I think when you're the president, you are the father of the country, and you're specifically the father to your party. And he allowed himself to get the crap kicked out of him by the media. And there were so many messes that went on. And a lot of us got disillusioned. And we had an 8-year period of Obama, and that let us regroup. And Trump saw a window. And Trump came down that escalator. This week was the 10-year anniversary of the escalator ride. And a lot of us joined that movement. And it was a breath of fresh air for a lot of us. We were able to look back, accept the things we had done wrong, and move on. And what we're witnessing now, as Ted Cruz brought this up the other night, is an overcorrection in the market, in the party. And I don't think it's by accident. You don't overcorrect this much. There had to be this hostility towards Jews, towards Israel, that was fermenting for a long time. Now, come along 2020, and we invited a lot of people into our group that don't belong in the group, that are faux MAGA. But then on the other hand, you also have a lot of people that are trying to make money off of MAGA. None of us are doing that. We're doing this for fun and for free. And I look at Steve Bannon, I look at Tucker Carlson, I look at Jack Posobiec, I look at all these charlatans.
So one thing that I want to say is I actually had even though I did vote for Trump in that first election, I had a big change of heart. I was snookered by the media, to be honest. I didn't quite understand the moral and ethical bankruptcy of the legacy media through the last number of years. And frankly, what really opened my eyes to it was how the media was treating Israel. And that was something that I had acute information on. I was scarcely more informed on a subject in my entire life. And when I started to see that pattern, there was a moment where I had this like aha moment, because my parents are staunch Trump advocates, but I used to argue with my mom about Trump. And there was some aha moment where I saw something happen where it was like the light bulb went off, and I was like, holy shit, this is what they're doing to Israel is a playbook. And it was the same playbook they ran on Trump. And so I wasn't always pedal to the floor like I am now. I've just had my eyes open.
No, I think that's extremely well said. And listen, I've been blessed. Some of you know, I do also host The World According to Ben Stein, and I've known Ben for the better part of 22 years. And if anybody, there is tape of Ben pre-2016 not endorsing Trump. He was endorsing Lindsey Graham at the time. And it actually happened. I'll tell you the story. It was that night that he won. He got called into Fox News to do punditry work for them, not paid punditry work. He never took a dime from any of them, to go on Cavuto's show at the time and talk about it. It was a great night. It was a fantastic night that night in 2016. But go on to the bigger point. I haven't changed. I feel like what's going on, you know how people say the party left me? These people are leaving us right now. MAGA's not leaving me. These people are leaving MAGA.
I want to address two things. I want to address what you're talking about, but I also want to speak to what Lee just talked about, because I wasn't like Lee. And I think it's awesome that I love the way you phrased it, right? That it shook you loose and it opened your mouth, right? Usually people are like, it opened my eyes, it opened my mind. This opened your mouth. That's amazing. I was raised by a guy who, my father, who is now he's 84 years old. He's doing CrossFit every day. The man is still a warrior. And as I told Judah on a previous podcast, while everyone else from Israel was calling me to tell me they were in shelters, my dad was at CrossFit. So he was the guy who, while raising me back and forth to Israel and America, always warned me that this day was coming. And I will admit, I used to be that guy who was, shouting on the corner like a crazy person, talking about Jew hatred's coming. This is not our country. I was talking about America. We are guests here, and I'm okay with the fact that we're guests here. But I don't need to go complain to anybody when they ask me to do the Christmas pageant at school, because I recognize this is a Christian country. And I recognize that Jews are here by virtue of the fact that we are allowed in. And I always used to say, when Jew hatred comes, it's not going to be the obvious swastika waving kind, even though these days it's that too. But I used to talk about the insidious, socially acceptable kind of Jew hatred and racism. I dressed up as, no, it's just criticism of Israel, or it's buried under these buzzwords like colonialist or Zionism. All the bullshit that we're hearing now is the same stuff that I was waiting for then. People used to call me crazy. They used to call me paranoid. People used to call me racist. Somehow I was racist or pointing out racism against the Jews. But I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received since October 7th and since the rise in anti-Semitism, the 200% rise in crimes that have been perpetrated against Jews, people calling me up and going, how did you know? Why didn't I listen? How did you see this coming? I was waiting for this. This is who I've always been. But when it comes to what's going on within the conservative movement, what's going on within the Republican Party, the GOP ranks, whatever you want to call it, I appreciate that you're calling it an overcorrection. An overcorrection signifies that we've swung in a particular direction. And the idea of this big tent dilution that's happening, I guess, is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is there's a lot of people in the party, the Nick Fuenteses of the world. By the way, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, too. She's always been, don't forget, Jewish space lasers. It's not like this is new information.
Although we do have the Jewish space lasers now.
I mean,
she's
yeah,
kind of right in a way. I mean, not to give her any credit, but we do have the space lasers. I mean, and maybe they're not coming from space, but kind of same idea.
You know what I told my wife the other day? You read like Jules Verne, half the time he would be like, I'm going to write this thing. And then we'd be like, that's a good idea. And then we'd invent it. I said, maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene is our Jules Verne. Space lasers were like, wait a minute. Thanks, baby. But these people already were in the camp of hating Jews. And now it's socially acceptable to say it out loud. And so some of it is not an overcorrection. It's just a removal of the mask. And when it comes to the other side, I also don't think it's an overcorrection, because as we've talked about before, you have the people who are paid for, as I believe Tucker Carlson is, the people who are grifters, as I believe the Dave Smiths of the world are, the people who are nuts, or also grifters, like Candace Owens, who falls into several categories, and on and on. Those people are also not an overcorrection. They're just crassly taking money from enemies of America. And what's a great way to undermine America? Jews come first. It just doesn't end with the Jews.
I want to let Lee go, and then I'll explain to you what my overcorrection, what I was referring to. Go ahead, Lee.
Part of what kind of shook me out of whatever my slumber was, was I had the same thing where my family, come from 4 grandparents who are all Holocaust survivors. My dad was even born in a Russian prison camp because my grandparents were fortunate enough to be caught by the Russians while they were fleeing the Germans instead of being caught by the Germans. And they said it could happen, and I really laughed it off and never thought that it could happen. And then, here we are. It took like a stiff breeze to throw off that, the thin veneer of Jew hatred. And it's certainly alarming, not surprising. Like when you see Tucker, like, is anybody surprised at the way Tucker talks about Jews. Like, I'm not surprised, paid by Qatar or not. I think that's who he is. I think Candace is a stranger one. When you listen to some of her prior statements, there was something I saw today, and she couldn't have been more glowing about Israel. And now, the about face, I don't know. Some say it's through her husband. I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised that she's being funded as well. Like, Qataris are great at spreading the money around to get what they want. They're masterful at it. I think Qatar is one of our greatest threats because they are so good at this kind of slippery actions. That being said, I was really pleased to see Trump kind of distance himself. I mean, forget about distance himself. Calling Tucker kooky was phenomenal. Like, what a better way to have Tucker being spanked on a global stage by the president whom he supported and really stood by. That must have really shaken him. And, I guess there was the conversation about the calls of him trying to get Trump to, I don't know, recant or change or back down or something like that. So I think we should be thankful that we've got Trump in the mindset of, like, look, we know what the chatter has been within the Jewish community around Trump, and that he'll turn on the Jews where it's convenient. And I think that that's certainly been spread by a lot from the left, and even a number of people from the right when they saw that Middle East trip. I think that they took some cues from that really, I think, were the wrong cues. And here we have, for the moment, and what seems to be really continued strong alignment. The other thing that I thought was incredible was not only the message that Huckabee sent to Trump, but the fact that Trump posted that message was incredibly telling, and a truly emotional message by Huckabee. And the fact that Trump felt motivated to share that with everyone, I think tells a lot, and certainly puts me at ease as to where this guy's heart really lies.
Listen, I agree with you 100%. I think if you look at Trump's track record with Jews, his whole life has been aces in my book. But Trump and his father have been nothing but incredible towards the Jewish community. Trump surrounds himself with Jews. Listen, this isn't just about Israel. Trump's been a remarkable president for Americans. America first has never left his mindset. And what I was referring to before, Golan, with the overcorrection is you see people like Charlie Kirk, they keep on invoking the Iraq War. Charlie Kirk might have been 9 years old at the time of the Iraq War. So he's getting this revisionist sort of, this is their talking point. This has become the new talking point. We screwed up Iraq and we screwed up in Afghanistan. And yes, we did. But Jimmy Carter also screwed up in 1979 when he let the Shah be deposed and he let the mullahs and the ayatollahs take over. Ronald Reagan also screwed up when he didn't, after the barracks were attacked. He didn't do anything in return. So there's a lot of negligence that's gone on in that region for a long time. So that's what I was referring to with the overcorrection.
Maybe people get twisted, or even if it's not said directly, is almost an implication that both Iraq and Afghanistan were somehow, that Israel contributed to that.
Yes.
Whereas they were nowhere to be found. They were not involved. They were not.
This is exactly right.
Like,
this is a key thing, is that people who are in this particular camp, even if they're not, all the people we just named, the grifters and the anti-Semites, people who are thinking about it this way, because I don't put Charlie Kirk in that category. I think that they're seeing Middle East, and then they just automatically conflate that with Israel. They automatically assume Israel has a hand in this. So if you're talking about Iraq, if you're talking about Syria, if you're talking about Iran, if you're talking about any of these things that have happened, you mentioned Afghanistan, any of these things, it's like plus Israel. It's like Israel's always the plus one at that party. But I think that Charlie Kirk is a really good example of this, is that he references Iraq all the time, but it's like he says it like it's a trump card in every foreign policy debate that he's having. By the way, I think Charlie Kirk overwhelmingly supports Israel.
He's a good guy. This is my point. But this is my point, Golan.
That's my thing, is that he says he's talking about neocons dragging us into a war then. And he's doing that thing that we talked about in a previous episode, where he is letting the mistakes of the past color current policies, or at least color the way he sees what we're doing now, for exactly the thing that Lee is talking about. The idea that, well, Israel's involved with both, and therefore, dot, dot, dot. And then he draws this conclusion that actually isn't steeped in the historical fact. So I think you've nailed it, Lee, is that it's the addition of that other element. It's like Bill Maher once said, avocado, you don't have to put it on fucking everything. And I think here, Israel, they're just putting it on everything.
Yeah, I think the other thing, there are two different components to this thing, right? There is, we don't want forever wars, and how do you consider what's the criteria for what looks like a forever war or not? And then a separate issue, which is sometimes connected but not always, is the regime change issue. It happens to be, I tend to agree that, regime change is a dangerous business and we're terrible at it. America is terrible at it. That being said, we often do it for the wrong reasons. Like, I think the other thing that where Trump is, I think Trump has made a deviation from a lot of even what Republicans have done in the past. We have had this kind of thesis that what America needs to do is export democracy, sometimes by the end of the barrel of a gun. And that has not served America well. It's actually served us extremely poorly. It's reputationally bad, it's financially bad, and we don't succeed. And so I think what's important is to unpack a lot of these things, understand that they don't come as a bundle, that you can actually make discrete decisions within what has been packaged together and do them separately. You can look at something and say, Iran at the moment doesn't have the criteria for what a forever war looks like. If the goal is to get rid of the nukes, well, that can be a discrete decision, an action by America to go take that out. And maybe it's not just the nukes. Like, let's talk about it unbundling. Maybe it's the nukes on one hand and the missiles on the other hand, and actually removing the threat of both of those things. And you can stop short of creating a regime change, because I think absolutely reasonable people can disagree on it. And I know when I look at the history, we've never done it well. I don't know who's done it well. And,
Well,
yeah.
I think it's important to separate two things out, right? Regime change is a word that has multiple definitions, actually, because regime change itself isn't inherently bad. It matters who initiates, it matters why it's
That's right.
initiated, right? So if you're talking about top-down foreign intervention, yeah, that's destabilizing. And I think America, when we do it, and we do it wrong, and we do it, through force. Hey, we're going to ladle this democracy over everything. It's like, hey, you know what? I love ranch dressing, but I'm not going to put it on my fucking ice cream. So not everything goes on top of everything else. I guess I'm hungry. All my metaphors today are
Yeah, two
food.
food metaphors. I like
Yeah,
it.
man.
I'm hungry. I haven't eaten yet today.
I'm on a broth cleanse right now, so forgive me.
That's why. Okay.
Oh
But
my God.
but yeah, excuse me. But when you so the top down thing, okay, but bottom up domestic revolt can be called freedom. Let's not forget the American Revolution was regime change, right? There are plenty of regime changes I can give throughout history that were great because they came from within for a purpose and they were done by the people. Sometimes, if you think about the Iranian Revolution, the one we're talking about from 1979, the one that actually started this particular regime, when that was going on, when they were deposing the Shah, people were in the streets marching about democracy. They were talking about women's rights. They were talking about all this stuff that they wanted to see as the regime change, and then they got the wrong regime. But the change itself was actually a good idea. So I think as long as we go about it like the fall of the Berlin Wall version of regime change, I think it can work. But that came from within and not because someone was trying to force it upon a people.
Well, I think you're bringing up something really important. It's sort of ironic with this whole regime change thing is that Jimmy Carter allowed a regime change, right? When he told the Shah to stand down, the Shah could have stayed in power had he mowed them down. That's what he was asking for. And we didn't learn an important lesson. And nobody wants to be honest about this one thing because everybody's scared to death. Like I always say, the six stupidest words that George Bush ever said of his many stupid things was Islam is a religion of peace. And in that region, when you are in charge of those countries, you are essentially often a zookeeper. And I don't care if I get in trouble for saying that. You guys don't have to agree with me, so don't worry. But your job is you are a zookeeper, and there are a lot of lions and tigers there, And sadly, you have to treat you're the head of the zoo. And when we took out Saddam, look what happened. The animals went wild, and it helped create ISIS. So we have to look at certain things and actually point out what the issue was. We didn't learn our lesson from the Shah, and then we try to do that. And what both of you are talking about is us coming in. And I always used to joke that Obama thought he was God and Bush thought he was the son of God, and we're trying to shape these countries in a way in our image, and that's not possible.
It's that they don't want it, right? They don't want it. They resist it. I think I would say it a little bit different than you, Judah. I think that what exists there is intense tribalism, and kind of a number of these countries are at least pseudo warlord states, and whichever warlord is able to muster the greatest amount of power, and typically by the sword, is the one that that governs. Even when you think about Jordan and Saudi, like, they are run by a tribal element that has taken power. That, look at MBS. How did MBS take the power that he has? It was not through diplomacy, right? He jailed all of his family members. Granted, it was in the Ritz-Carlton, so it was pretty nice. But that being said, it was violence that brought
It was pretty nice, except for all the people who never left the Ritz-Carlton, but we don't have to talk about that.
Yeah.
It's like the hotel. It's like the Hotel Saudi Arabia. You can check out anytime you like.
Yeah.
You can never leave.
Yeah. So it's a the Middle East is not the West. It's just not. Like those the activists found out when they showed up in Egypt, and were somehow shocked that they weren't going to let them march on Gaza. It's just different. The rules are different. The vibe is different. The POV is different, and the rules of engagement are different. And finally, we have a president that kind of is like, let's stop the nonsense of the past. Like, I feel I have found myself defending that Middle East trip to a lot of people that just don't get the pragmatism that's involved in that, of like, of a different strategy that says, let us not force the import of democracy, and let's try a different tactic. Let's look at shared interest. Saudi is, to me, clearly trying to be part of the global financial community. They're trying to be the global citizenry. It doesn't mean that they are going to walk away from what their culture is, and they're not going to, and they're moving in the right direction, even if they're moving too slowly for most people. But they're looking to have a prosperous future. And the idea is, Trump went and said, okay, how do we become a participant of that, and a partner with you to get there? And then when you have something to lose, you don't detonate it, typically.
I think Golan, I think what he just said is absolutely brilliant, and it's absolutely what we've been also saying. So I'll give us all a little bit of
So everybody's
brilliance.
brilliant here? Yeah.
Well, just spread the brilliance around. And let me just say, when I said about the zoo thing, what's interesting is Iran was the only place where they really weren't animals. Iran actually had an Enlightenment period because it's Persian. And when you look at images of Iran 1975, or however many years the Shah was in power, it looks like anywhere else in Europe. And so moving on to what Lee just said, Golan, I'll take it even a step further with, as I've brought up, what Trump did there was brilliant. Minus the Qatar thing,
Yeah,
was absolutely brilliant. Trump realizes Europe is dying. Europe is a dying dog. And Trump realizes this more than anybody, and hence the Abraham Accords. And I really believe he is creating, as I've said before, a new European Union, a new axis over there. And what Trump supporters do not understand is, after quid pro, there's a quo. And if they're investing trillions with us, they're not doing it. They don't need the money in return. These people have so much money. It's sort of like, here's money. We need security. What do we need security from? Those crazy mullahs over there with the nuclear weapon. The only people that are not fighting for Israel right now, against Israel, to destroy Iran is the Saudis, the Egyptians, and every other ally we now have over there, and a few of us over here.
So I've taken it even a step further. And what I say is, I'm not sure we should be describing things as Western values anymore. Because when we've historically talked about Western values, that's Europe, right? It's Europe and America. I don't think that's what Europe is doing right now, or at least the historically enlightened parts of Europe. If you were to look at a trend line, right, of where is, I'll pick on, in France in particular, and if you look at the American values and look at what they're doing, so they are jailing people for social media. They're jailing people for praying silently. They are putting in Islamists into their government at kind of at a record pace. And they are turning their countries into something that more resembles third world environments, right? So you look at those trends, and those are all going in the wrong direction. Then you look at the Middle East and look at Saudi and look at UAE in particular. And what are the trend lines there? Yes, they have some catching up to do in some of the social and in some of the social aspects, right? But they are on the upswing. Again, even if it's slower than a lot of people like, you don't turn a multi-millennial culture on a dime. You can't lose the people, right? There are people you have to bring the people along to change. And so I look at that, and then I look at how those two groups are treating Israel, and who we know that Israel fights for the same values that America fights for. That's what the composition of Israel is. That's what they champion. And I look at it and go, yeah, I don't want to say. I think Western values is like a misnomer, or maybe it's something else. It's just it is the definition of Western values. I don't think holds true anymore, and so I would prefer to call it now American values that are somewhere else, because the Western countries don't necessarily align with that anymore, and censorship and things like that. And whereas I can see a future in the Middle East where, okay, maybe it's not a direct overlap in our values, but it's much more closely aligned than with American values than what a lot of European countries are doing right now.
I would say, you're saying, what does it mean? So you got to look at what it used to mean, right? So Western values rooted in, let's say, Judeo-Christian kind of concepts, and maybe Greco-Roman thought, or maybe like Enlightenment philosophy, right? The idea of individual liberty, the idea of like free speech and religious freedoms and private property rights and limited government, like all the stuff that not everybody in America is doing either, by the way. I mean, that's the interesting part, is when you really think about one of the major cornerstones of Western values was the meritocracy, right? And the idea was not equality of outcome, it was equality before the law. And so now the thing that we're being asked to look at over and over again, whether it has to do with equity, or whether it has to do with an overbearing government, or whether it has to do with throwing out the meritocracy, or even now what's happening with a lot of religious groups, especially Judeo-Christian groups, they're being looked down upon. They're being kind of pushed out of parts of society, or mocked, or looked at as if they're all zealots, no matter what. I'm a Jew. But anyone who even says Jesus is suddenly far right. Like there's no middle ground anymore. So I would say Western values don't even apply to most of America, or a lot of America anymore either. And today, I guess you could say the America First types, parts of Israel, and specific parts of Central Europe. If you're thinking about like Poland, Slovakia, yeah, Hungary. Right now, Trump just went to the Arab states, but there's really still, despite all the progressivism, there really is no separation between mosque and state, in any of these countries. And I'm not even talking about the individual rights and freedom of expression, or gay rights, or women's rights, or all the stuff that also not working so well in all of those places. So maybe Western values, while we say it as a buzzword, like you said, is the wrong phrase. Maybe we need to come up with something new and just call it values.
Yeah, although, look, I think that the expectation that any of those Middle Eastern countries will separate church from state or mosque from state is not going to happen. That's not what they're about. For them, it's a part of, Islam is a political religion, and so it will not be separated. So I look at that and go, okay, well, if you deal with the rest of the stuff the way we would, well, that's enough of a shared value. Like for us, it's a red line for us to mix religion and politics, but does it necessarily mean that that is a bad country or an evil country or something like that? And I don't think so. I think, again, I look at UAE is really a success case where it's modern. It's you're safe there as a Jew, as a Christian, as a whatever. Maybe they've got to improve a little bit on some of the other things, and it's probably, I think that you're not unsafe if you're gay, but I don't think that they're hosting any pride parades anytime soon. And but maybe that changes in a couple of years. Like everybody.
Lee, the winds of change blow strange. And I encourage always everybody to listen to that song by the Scorpions in, what was it, 1991? Because that really was, and I know Golan, it was a CIA.
That's right.
PSYOP.
Financed by the CIA.
Financed by
What?
the CIA. I
Oh,
have no idea.
if you get a chance,
The
check out the
Scorpions?
podcast. Lee, there is I'm sorry, Judah, I have to mention it. There is a podcast called The Wind of Change. Check it out. It is all about how that song and also some of the books by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the paintings by Jackson Pollock, all CIA psyops to basically screw with people's perception of Russia. It's amazing. I highly recommend.
And since I love this conversation so much today and did not want it to end, and you guys brought me into such a good headspace, which I was not before we started this program, part 2 will be here tomorrow. On that note, everybody, have a good morning, afternoon, and evening, world, wherever you are. And since it is Friday, have a great weekend, everybody.